Good morning. Welcome back. Today is July 11th, or 7-Eleven for those of you who like those kind of things. But besides having a nifty number combination, some interesting stuff happened on this date. In 1533, this is the date that Pope Clement VII excommunicates King Henry VIII in England. So the story is basically that Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon, a very Catholic wife who had very Catholic family members. Who were very much in control of the Pope at that time. But Catherine of Aragon did not have any sons, or was not producing a son, so to speak. And so Henry VIII was looking for a way to divorce her using the church's mechanisms. He actually requested that the church annul the wedding, but they refused. And so he went and divorced her anyway. Well, the Catholic Church didn't like that, and so Pope Clement excommunicates him. Henry VIII, not to be outdone, says, well, basically, if you're going to excommunicate me, I'm just going to take all of the Catholic land in England, make it my own, and then start my own church. So Henry VIII ended up with all of the land in England, his own church, and 5 more wives after Catherine of Aragon. He ultimately did get his male son. I think Edward VI was the son of his 3rd wife. But he died, as Edward died, and then Mary I'm not sure how it went. It ended up with Elizabeth, good Queen Bess, who was Elizabeth I. It was on this date in 1804, in the early morning hours at Weehawken, New Jersey, that the famous Aaron Burr-Alexander Hamilton duel took place. As everybody knows, Hamilton lost. And dies the next day. If you follow up with that story, read the book by Chernow, you realize that this was a really, really stupid reason to have a duel. Aaron Burr, by the way, is the grandson of the famous Great Awakening pastor and preacher theologian Jonathan Edwards. So that took place on this date in 1804. In 1906, Grace Brown was murdered. Now, Grace Brown was a New York woman, about 20 years old, was dating a guy named Gillette. She became pregnant, tells Gillette. They go off into Big Moose Lake in New York, and then, depending on who you believe, she ends up in the water, drowned. Okay, it was a big media event of the day, a lot of press. Gillette was ultimately convicted and executed for the crime. Theodore Dreiser's famous book, An American Tragedy, which was published about 10 years later, is actually based on this particular event. So, it took place in 1906. Speaking of famous books, in 1960, the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. To Kill a Mockingbird was published on this date in 1960. And in 1979, if you were looking to the skies, it was to make sure that Skylab didn't fall on you, because this was the date that the first space station that the U.S. set up in the late 1970s re-entered the atmosphere over Australia. And if you remember the date, as I do at the time, people were wondering whether it was going to land. In fact, just a couple of months or so, within the last year or so, there was another rocket or something, satellite, I believe that was Chinese, that was re-entering the atmosphere, which was bringing back fond memories of Skylab for those of us who were around at the time. Birthdays on this date include Thomas Bowdler, 1754, an English physician who took it upon himself to edit the works of Shakespeare and create what he called the family Shakespeare. It was an expurgated version, sanitized for the youngsters so that they wouldn't be scandalized by reading Shakespeare. In fact, to this date, if you do something like that, where you take somebody's writing and you get out all of the nasty parts, it's referred to as Bowdlerizing it. But Thomas Bowdler was born in this state in 1754. John Quincy Adams was born 1767. This is John Adams' son. And he was also the 6th president of the United States and one of the great Americans of the first part of the 18th century. Quincy Adams, by the way, was somebody who knew both the founding fathers, Adams, Jefferson, Washington, all those guys, as well as Abraham Lincoln, because he served in the House with him. But he was born on this date in 1767. 1850, in the year 1850, Annie Walker Armstrong was born. Annie Walker Armstrong was a Baptist woman from Maryland, was very significant and influential in the creating of the Women's Missionary Union, was a tireless advocate for North American missions her entire life. In fact, even to this day, the Southern Baptist Convention, I believe they still do this, has an annual Easter offering for North American missions called the Annie Armstrong offering. It takes place every year at Easter. In 1915, Magda Gabor was born in Hungary. Magda Gabor. Now, I did not know this, but most of us are familiar with Zsa Zsa Gabor and Eva Gabor, if you've ever seen the show Green Acres. But there was a third Gabor sister, Magda Gabor. She was the older of the three. So there were three Gabor sisters, Magda Gabor, Eva Gabor, and Zsa Zsa Gabor. I did not know that. I knew there were two, but I did not realize there was a third. But her birthday is today, 1915. Also born in this date in 1920, Yul Brynner. Yul Brynner was born in this date, famous for a lot of different roles, Magnificent Seven, and also for The King and I. I mention that because I know my father-in-law was very enamored with the way Yul Brynner said etc., etc., etc. in the King and I, so much so that his kids at one point bought him a wall decoration that has the word ETC on it, etc., etc., etc. Finally, people who died on this date include in 1937 George Gershwin. Died on this date in 1937. He was only 38 years old at the time. And finally, it was on this date in 1989 that Laurence Olivier died, the famous British actor, stage and screen. In fact, his production of Hamlet his screen production of Hamlet in 1948 is the only Shakespeare production to have won an Academy Award. And also, we talked last week about the Antoinette Perry Awards, the Tony Awards. Well, in England, the theater awards in England are called the Oliviers. So we're just keeping you up because theater is back. All right. Well, that's it for the things of this day. We're going to get back into talking about Isaiah. Today we're going to get through a couple of chapters talking about the fall of Babylon and Edom and all of those kind of stuff. So let's get back to that. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion of the book of Isaiah, the great prophet of the southern kingdom. We're in that section of the book where he is listing out a series of oracles, so these judgments, pronouncements of countries that are surrounding the nation of Israel, or that the nation of Israel, and by Israel it could be Judah, it could be Israel and Judah combined, that have business with. Okay, so like Assyria doesn't necessarily, or Babylon doesn't necessarily border, but it's certainly, being a very large power, is very influential in what happens there. And even today we're going to talk that Isaiah takes a little sidestep and says, hey, wait a minute, Jerusalem, let me talk to you guys for a minute. So it's kind of interesting here how that works. Now, last week we talked about Cush and the messengers that the Lord was going to use, and then he was talking about what was going to happen to Egypt, and we talked about how that was kind of reminiscent. The oracle and the judgment of what was going to happen was somewhat reminiscent of what had happened in the Exodus, when we talk about Exodus 1 through chapter 20, that story there. And we talked about that. Okay. Now today we're going to talk about Babylon. Okay. Now Babylon is a big bad. Again, it's Assyria, it's Babylon, it's the Medes and the Persians. So these three. So Isaiah's going to keep coming back to these guys because these are like the really big bad guys. Okay. Now we're talking about Babylon at this chapter, in chapter 21. So we're going to start in chapter 21. So we're going to get through chapter 21 and 22 today. And then we'll continue on next week when we talk about Tyre. So, fairly well-known passage, maybe not as much as chapter 6 or chapter 40, but well-known enough to call it one of Isaiah's greatest hits. All right. beginning with verse 1. The oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea. As whirlwinds in the Negev sweep on, it comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land. A stern vision is told to me. The traitor betrays and the destroyer destroys. Go up, O Elam, lay siege, O Media. All the sighing she has caused I bring to an end. Therefore, my loins are filled with anguish. Pangs have seized me, like the pangs of a woman in labor. I am bowed down so that I cannot hear. I am dismayed so that I cannot see. My heart staggers. Horror has appalled me. The twilight I longed for has been turned for me into trembling. Okay, let me stop there for a second as we talk about this vision that Isaiah is about to have, or that he's about to share with his readers or the people that are listening to him at the time he originally gives this. Okay, what he's talking about here, the wilderness of the sea, we really don't know what that means. I mean, some have speculated a lot of different stuff, something about the sea and out of the sea and the mess, the things in Daniel where the visions coming from the sea. We do know from verse 9 of this chapter that he's specifically talking about Babylon. So perhaps it's one of those expressions that's just kind of been lost to time, that maybe that was their nickname. Like, some people don't realize that Illinois is the land of Lincoln and the Prairie State. So some people may not recognize that, okay? So perhaps, and it's just something that got lost over time, okay? But this is a message, and we know from later in the text that he's talking about Babylon. Okay, as whirlwinds in the Negev sweep on, it comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land. Okay, and I think the passage here, he's just, rather than trying to focus on, okay, where's the Negev and what is, it's part of the desert, but just looking that what's going to happen is going to happen suddenly, like a storm in the desert comes in. Okay, that's how it's going to come in and hit here. A stern vision is told to me. Now this is Isaiah. So Isaiah is saying a stern vision. He's receiving this vision and now he's sharing the vision with his readers. Okay. The traitor betrays and the destroyer destroys. Okay. This is kind of an interesting thing here. The traitor destroys. This is sort of like that haters gonna hate kind of stuff. Well, yeah, of course, that's what they do. There's a line from Hamlet where Hamlet is asked a question and he gives just a flippant answer, and the other character says, needs not a ghost come from beyond the grave to tell us this. We don't need a ghost to tell us that. This flippant answer that he has given. Okay, so that's he just says, okay, traitors. The traitor betrays and the destroyer destroys. Now, one thought is that there were people within the Israelite leadership or the intelligentsia that were looking to Babylon for help. Okay, that were looking for Babylon to kind of stabilize things. Now, this may be true. That's speculation, but it does fit into the idea of Isaiah's talking about who are you going to trust. Okay, and so this is why he's saying, listen, the traitor betrays and the destroyer destroys. You got to remember that. These guys, if they're a traitor, they're going to betray you. If they're a destroyer, they're going to destroy you. Go up, O Elam, lay siege, O Media. Now, these are two smaller areas that are traditionally enemies of Babylon. But he says, go up. All the sighing she has caused, I bring to an end. Okay, this is not Elam or Media. This is talking about Babylon. Okay, the Lord is saying, all this I bring to an end. Okay. Remember when we talked about, here the Lord is just saying, I'm going to do this. I'm bringing it to an end. Remember in Isaiah 14 where the Lord says, and let me get the verse here, surely as I have planned, so it will be, and as I have purposed, so it will happen. He says, I'm going to bring it to an end. All of this that you're worried about, I'm going to bring that to an end. Okay. So, and then in verses 3 and 4, as Isaiah receives the full impact of what this destruction on Babylon is going to be, it affects him physically, and he talks about this. Therefore my loins are filled with anguish, pangs have seized me like the pangs of a woman in labor. I am bowed down so that I cannot hear. I am dismayed so that I cannot see. My heart staggers. Horror has appalled me. Okay, so he is just awestruck by this. It's making him physically sick, the extent of the destruction and the devastation that's going to happen to to the nation of Babylon. And yet, what are they doing here? Okay, the people that he's talking to, they prepare the table, they spread the rugs, they eat, they drink. Okay. Now, some people have looked at this and said, okay, he's kind of a reference to the story in Daniel chapter 5, where the fall of Babylon, with the Belshazzar and the feast and their handwriting on the wall and the knees knocking together, that they're having a party even though they're surrounded. Okay. That's could possibly be. All right. Because again, one of the questions about this text, and I'll get to it a little bit later, is whether Isaiah is talking about a future event, like this is going to be in the future, or he's looking at a past event and saying, just like it was then, it's going to be. Now, both of them involve looking at into the future, but one of them is just kind of, in the future, one of them is saying, yeah, just like this, it's going to be like that. Okay, and we'll see that a little bit later. All right. They spread the rugs, they eat, they drink. Arise, O princes, oil the shield. Okay, well, what is this about? Well, generally it's thought that oiling the shield, they were talking about having leather shields, okay, not shields made of metal, or possibly metal, and having some sort of oil that would protect the shield. Like if you put oil on a leather, like you would put oil on a baseball glove, it would help it to make it supple, to keep it from cracking. So basically he's saying, hey, you guys are creating a meal, you need to get up and get ready for what's going to happen. Okay, but it's going to happen, and Isaiah is not in Babylon. He's not near Babylon, but he's saying to Babylon, this is what you should be doing, not what you are doing. Okay, then we get to the point here that perhaps some of you have heard this phrase before in verse 6. For thus the Lord said to me, again, this is Isaiah talking, go, set a watchman, let him announce what he sees. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. Okay? So, here's the thing. Okay, so go set a watchman. Okay, go set a watchman. That's, again, there's sermons, go set a watchman. This idea of a watchman is like put somebody up on the ramparts, on the wall, so they can look out and see what's happening, see what's on the horizon. Okay, again, this is sort of like the watchman itself. Some people talk about it, you use it, oh well, the watchman is Isaiah, the watchman is the prophet. Okay, well, that could be. Okay, except for the fact that, and I get that that's traditionally what it's thought. The problem I have with that is a couple. One is a little, I don't know. Here's the thing. It says, go set a watchman, and anybody who claims it says, I'm just being a watchman. But what is the watchman supposed to do? He's supposed to get up there and he's supposed to listen. Okay, most people that claim to be watchmen and prophets are not really good at listening, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so that's free. But Isaiah is told, go set a watchman. He's not told, go be a watchman. Go up and watch for me. He said, go set a watchman. Get somebody to stand up there, and here's what he's supposed to do. When he sees this particular thing coming, he's supposed to listen to what they have to say. And then what a watchman does is he comes back and reports it to his or her superiors. Okay? So he says, when he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, when he sees this, listen to what they have to say. Now, is he talking about seeing a caravan? Is he talking about, we don't really know. He just said, when you see this particular thing, maybe it's just that at this point around Jerusalem, nothing is coming or going, and all of a sudden you see something that would be unusual. Anything, any one of these. Maybe it's it's kind of like that. But these watchmen are out there looking. Again, in Hamlet, the play starts with the watchman. Okay, there's watchmen up on the wall of the city, in Elsinore, and they're up there on the wall of the castle, and they see a ghost, and they see a ghost, and they see a ghost the next night, and so then they send for Horatio, and Horatio sees the ghost, and then Horatio sends for Hamlet, and Hamlet sees the ghost, and Hamlet talks to the ghost, and then hilarity ensues throughout the play. Although I don't know if I'd call it hilarity. Hamlet's a great play, by the way. Laurence Olivier, very good at Hamlet, did it many times. But be that as it may, so these watchmen are up there watching, okay, and he's told very specifically, do this, watch out for this, and when you see this, let me know. Okay, come back with the message. So then he who saw cried out, Upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and at my post I am stationed whole night. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. Okay, and he answered, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And so what's left out here is he apparently got whatever it is they had to say, and he answered, Fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. O my threshold and winnowed one, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. Okay, so now here, he set the watchman. The watchman has seen what the Lord told him to look out for. He's heard the message, and the message here at this point is just that Babylon has fallen. Okay, Babylon has fallen. This great city has fallen. And it comes back. Now, again, Isaiah knew the extent of the destruction, that it's like, wow, if that happened, that's huge. Okay, so in what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the Lord God of Israel, I announce to you. And of course, this phrase, fallen as Babylon, is repeated, is modified. The commentators say in verse 8 in Revelation chapter 14, and I think again in chapter 18, where it talks about fallen as Babylon. Babylon has fallen, whereas Babylon in Revelation symbolizes that whole world system that is anti-God, that anti-God system. Okay, so they're drawing on this prophecy, this story for Revelation, but here it's just talking about this destruction of Babylon. And again, if the nation of Israel at the time had been looking to Babylon to stabilize things, maybe not to be good friends with them, but to at least stabilize the situation, this would have been a real disappointment. Getting back to the question, who are you going to trust? Okay, who are you going to trust? Okay, and that's really all that there is on this thing about Babylon here. So set this watchman, and when he says this, get the message, and the message says Babylon has fallen. Okay. All right. Verse 11. The oracle concerning Duma. One is calling to me from Seir. Watchman, what time of the night? Watchman, what time of the night? The watchman says, Morning comes and also the night. If you will inquire, come back again. Okay. Now this is a fun little passage. And if this is really the more well-known as far as set of watchmen, here this is watchman, what time of the night, or in the King James it was watchman, what of the night. Okay, and there are, you just Google it, you can find there are a bunch of sermons available even on YouTube where preachers preach this. There's one just doing like a quick Google search here. It's W.A. Criswell had one. George Mueller, okay, the great English believer in the early 19th century, 18th century, but he had a sermon, Watchman, what of the night? Okay, Watchman, what's left of the night? Trying to draw a lot of out of this, a lot more out of this. Okay, but again, this is in the context of these oracles. Okay, and this one is kind of also probably related to the Babylon. So it may be the same person, the watchman may be the same person, except it's a different word. Okay, so it's translated watchman both times. So the watchman earlier is like the person on the wall. Okay, whereas the word that's translated watchman here is more like the guard at the door. Okay, now there's a lot of overriding or overlapping concerns that these two guys would both have. But this watchman is more the guard at the door, okay? And this message is coming from Seir. Now, Seir, Duma is either a location, and there is a place called Duma, or it's a play on words for Edom, okay? Now, what is Edom? Okay, it's an area. Edom itself, Edom, is an area south of Judah. Okay, it will be below the Dead Sea. And this is the area, and if you go back to Genesis 32, that these are the descendants of Esau. Okay, so remember, Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau, and Esau is the older, Jacob is the younger, and the older loses his birth, sells his birthright and gets the blessing. Jacob gets the blessing and all of that, and Jacob becomes Israel. Okay, so these guys, again, these are relatives. These are distant relations of Israel. Okay, of the nation of Israel. I mean, multiple generations back, but still they're related nonetheless. Okay, so these guys are in the south, and this message is coming to the to the watchman or to the guard at the door. It's like, what of the night, or what's left, and again, what time of the night? What time is it? How much time do we have left? And the guard gives us, again, equally problematic reply. Okay, morning comes and also the night. Needs not a ghost come from beyond the grave to tell us this, my Lord. Okay, morning comes and also the night. If you will inquire, come back again. Okay, so he said, watchman, what of the night? What of the night? What? How much time is it? When is this going to happen? When is this all going to happen? And the guard at the door is just kind of brushing him off. He's saying, I don't know, maybe later, come back. Right now, I don't have an answer for you, come back later. So again, it's not, it's a tricky one, because it's popular to talk about being ready for things and all, and that's great. But I think it's just kind of looking at this level of uncertainty. I think it kind of adds to the level of uncertainty that comes with the fall of this great Babylonian power. Okay, so the next one is an oracle concerning Arabia. Okay, now here with Arabia, I don't think we're talking about a specific location per se as much as a general area, because this is actually talking about kind of a rescue attempt or a plea for help. Okay, in the thickets in Arabia you will lodge, O caravans of Dedanites. To the thirsty bring water, meet the fugitive with bread, O inhabitants of the land of Tema. For they have fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, from the bent bow, and from the press of battle. Okay, so again, whatever's happening in Babylon, a part of this fall, there's a group of people that are escaping from it. There are a group of people that are running from the battle, and they're gonna hide in the forests of Arabia. Now, some look at this and think that this is probably being sarcastic, or maybe it's asking a question: are you going to hide in the forests of Arabia? And what the trouble is Arabia is a desert area. So there's not a lot of forest, what we would consider a forest, there to hide in. So, it could be like, what do you think? There's a forest that you're going to hide in? You think you're going to get away because you got away, that somehow in Arabia you're going to be safe? So yeah, bring food, bring water, because you're going to be there. But what happens in verse 16? For thus the Lord said to me, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end, and the remainder of the archers of the mighty men of the sons of Kedar will be few. For the Lord, the God of Israel, has spoken. Okay, so in other words, he's saying, listen, you guys are going to escape, but it's going to be just temporary. Okay, the Lord has spoken. We're getting back to Isaiah chapter 14, what his purpose is going to happen. And this in and of itself would be a comfort to the Jewish readers who would say, okay, the Lord is going to keep his promises. Again, who are you going to trust? The Lord is just saying this, within a year, this is going to happen. Okay, and so, on the one hand, this is the chapter 21 has been a series of these oracles, three of them, where they talk about Babylon and related areas that, okay, it's going to cause uncertainty, that there's some are going to try and escape, but the Lord is going to, really is going to fit his promises. So what is Jerusalem doing? What is Israel doing, or what is Judah doing during this time? Okay, the oracle concerning the valley of vision. Okay, now here when he says the valley of vision, okay, this is probably, we don't know this for a fact, but others have suggested that this is being sarcastic. Okay, because again, in the context of watchmen, what is it about a watchman on the wall? Well, he or she is up high where they can see. Okay, that's the point. So if you want to have a vision, you want to see what's going on, you need to be up high, you need to be above things. So the place you don't want to be, if you want to have good vision, is in a valley. Okay? Now Now, it could very well be that in this valley is where visions are given. Could mean that as well. Okay, so we don't know, but it's just given the context of the talking about the watchman and all that, kind of makes you think, you know what, this is kind of being sarcastic. Okay, because now Isaiah is looking at the response of those in Jerusalem, those in Judea, to this news, this tragic news for the people of Babylon and these other areas. What do you mean that you have gone up of you to the housetops, you who are full of shoutings, tumultuous city, exultant town? Like, why are you celebrating? Okay. Then here he's like, he's looking at the people there, and he's saying, you know, you've got nothing to celebrate here. Okay. Your slain are not slain with the sword or dead in battle. All your leaders have fled together. Without the bow they were captured. All of you who were found were captured, though they had fled far away. Therefore I said, okay, well, let's look at these two verses here. Full of shouting, tumultuous city. Why are you celebrating? Look, you guys were kind of a failure in battle. Like, your guys didn't die in battle. You know, this is nothing for you to be celebrating, and yet there you are. Okay. Then Isaiah says in verse 4, therefore I said, look away from me, let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of my daughter. Concerning the destruction of my people. Okay. So Isaiah is not in a partying mood. Okay. So the people are like saying, you know, the people around him are partying, are celebrating. And Isaiah is there going, this is nothing to be happy about. Let's go back to Hamlet again for the third or fourth time. Okay, the second big scene in the play takes place at a kind of a reception for the king and queen, who, you know, they had just gotten married. The brother uncle marries the queen, you know, Gertrude and Claudius, and they're all having this kind of celebration. And there's Hamlet standing off in the corner wearing black, and this is the Stan version of the play. It's like they go through several people, and finally they look to Hamlet and say, Hamlet, why do you look so sad? You know, and Hamlet's like, no, I don't look sad. I'm happy. And it's kind of a weird thing. You know, so they kind of go back and forth. And so it's like the people are everyone else, and Isaiah is Hamlet. He's in the corner dressed in black. Okay, kind of showing that he's sad about what's going on, whereas everyone else seems to be happy about it. Okay. So do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. Don't try to cheer me up. Okay, Isaiah's like, don't try to cheer me up. For the Lord God of hosts has a day of tumult and trampling and confusion in the valley of the vision. Okay, remember we've talked about that, in that day. Here's a kind of another way of saying the same thing. A battering down of walls and a shouting to the mountains. Okay, so this day includes a battering down of walls and a shouting to the mountains. Okay. Now, here's where we get into, well, let me say something about this battering down the walls. This is an interesting phrase because it's only used here in Isaiah. Okay, it's not used anywhere else. So, and there's no other place that they've seen this word. So the scholars don't really know what this phrase means. Okay. One other, Oswald translated it as lifting up a shout. Okay, which is, you know, lifting up a shout rather than battering down walls, because that, you know, his argument is that it goes along with what the people in Israel are doing. I don't know, but he's talking about this day that the Lord is going to have. All right. Now, in verses 6 through 8, this is where we start talking. 6 and following, we get to talking about is Isaiah talking about a past event, or is he talking about a future event? Or is he talking about a future event in light of a past event? And I think that latter is, or the third is what's happening. Just like what happened here, this is what's going to happen there. And many look at this and say this particular prophecy, it was penned or delivered by Isaiah later in his life. Okay? Because when if you study the life of Hezekiah, you'll see, you know, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And Elam bore the quiver with chariots and horsemen, and Kir uncovered the shield. Your choicest valleys are full of chariots, and the horsemen took the stand at the gates. He has taken away the covering of Judah. Okay, talking about this time where Judah was inundated, was overrun. Okay, in that day you looked. Okay, again, you looked at when this happened. You guys looked. So it makes you think it's a past event. You looked to the weapons of the house of the forest, and you saw that the breaches of the city of David were many. Okay, so you knew you were in trouble. And you saw that, you collected the waters of the lower pool, and you counted the houses of Jerusalem, and you broke down the houses to fortify the wall. You made a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool. So you did a lot of stuff, okay? These are all different things that you would do if you're under siege, okay? These are different defensive techniques, okay? Things that you can figure out. But what Isaiah wants to point out is what he didn't do. But you did not look to him who did it or see him who planned it long ago. Again, surely as I have planned, so it will be. As I have purposed, so it will happen. So here you were under siege and you had the opportunity to trust God and you didn't. Okay, just like that, going to be in the future. Now, as far as looking at moving the water and all of that, some have looked at this as being Hezekiah, because Hezekiah does do some things with water and rivers and that kind of stuff when he's the king. Could be. But here, this is a situation where they could have trusted God, and yet they didn't. And Isaiah is saying, just in the future, this is what's going to happen. But you did not look to him who did it. In that day, verse 12, in that day the Lord God of hosts called for weeping and mourning, for baldness and wearing sackcloth. Okay? So he says, this is what the Lord wanted. And then the next verse, here's what you did. And behold, joy and gladness, killing oxen and slaughtering sheep, eating flesh and drinking wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So they should have been mourning. They should have been in sorrow. They should have been approaching God for deliverance. And instead they're having a party. Okay, so Isaiah's like, this is not how it's supposed to be. Okay, but again, go back to Isaiah 6. What did in Isaiah's commission? What did he say was going to happen as a result of his ministry? He said, you're going to be preaching, and these people, they're not going to listen to you. Hearts are going to get harder and harder and harder. And here's an example of just the prophecy, if you want to call it that, of Isaiah 6 coming true. The Lord of hosts has revealed himself in my ears. Surely this iniquity will not be atoned for you until you die, says the Lord God of hosts. Okay. Oswald says, a people who will not recognize their sin will never exercise that faith in God's provision what makes a right relationship to him possible. Okay. So he's saying here that this iniquity, this refusing to come to me, isn't going to be forgiven because you're never going to come to me. That's what it comes down to. Okay. So in general, he's got this general pronouncement, this general indictment of Israel here, of Jerusalem, Judah, and says, listen, guys, I gave you this news and you should be sad, you should be coming to me, but instead you're partying. You're celebrating as if this is something you had something to do with. And then he just briefly in verses 15 through 25, he drops into a little anecdote that kind of illustrates in a small way one manifestation of this larger issue. Okay, so he's going to tell the story of these two individuals, Shebna and Eliakim, and what happened to them as an illustration of this. So there's sort of a bad part of it. Then it's like, oh, well, this is good. But then it's like, well, no, wait, still, what purpose is going to happen anyway? So let's go with this. In verse 15, thus says the Lord God of hosts, come, go to this steward, to Shebna, who is over the household, and say to him, what have you to do here, and whom have you here, that you have cut out here a tomb for yourself, you who cut out a tomb on the height and carve a dwelling for yourself on the rock? Okay, so Shebna is some sort of an official. We don't exactly know what he does, but it's fairly high up. Okay, it's fairly high up the royal corporate food chain. And rather than focus on what the people should be doing, Shebna is worried about his legacy. He's worried about having a grand tomb to be buried in. Okay, now this was not unusual for the time, but it's not where his focus should have been. Okay, and so the Lord says, "What are you doing out here? Why are you doing all of this when you should be back worried about what I had told you?" He says, "Behold, the Lord will hurl you away violently." violently, O you strong man. He will seize firm hold on you. Okay. This is kind of interesting. It kind of reminds me of that story in Luke 12 about the rich man and with the barns, and I'll tear down my barns and grow bigger ones. And in Luke 12, it says, you fool, this night your life will be required. And here it's like, Shebna, I gave you, this is what you should be doing, and instead you're out here worrying about your tomb. You're not going to have any of this. Okay. He will seize firm hold on you and whirl you around and around and throw you like a ball into the wide land. There you shall die, and there shall be your glorious chariots, you shame of your master's house. I will thrust you from your office, and you will be pulled down from your station. Okay. Now this guy and Eliakim do come back. They are real characters. They're in Kings, and this does happen. He does lose his position, okay? But he doesn't necessarily go away quietly. I mean, he has another, and I don't want to get into that particular thing, but he loses the position he has, and then this guy Eliakim comes and takes over. Okay, and then in let's see, in that day, verse 20, so I'm in chapter 22, verse 20, in that day I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah. Okay. Now in Isaiah, it's something really good to be called a servant. Okay. It's something really good to be called a servant. The son of Hilkiah. And I will clothe him with your robe, and I will bind your sash on him, and will commit your authority to his hand, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. Okay, so this Eliakim is going to do great stuff. Okay. He's going to be doing what you should have been doing. Okay. What you should be doing. Okay. And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. And I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and he will become a throne of honor to his father's house. Okay, so so far this is great for Eliakim. Okay, Shebna not doing what he's supposed to do. I'm going to replace you. I'm going to put in Eliakim. Okay, now let me stop for a minute and talk about Josiah. 2 Kings 22, I think. So Josiah is like a great king. Okay, super great king. He's like the grandson or great grandson of Hezekiah. And the city, the nation of Judah has really declined. And Josiah finds the book of the law in the wall of the temple. Okay. And he reads it and he's convicted. He says, oh man, we've been doing wrong. We've been doing wrong. And he mounts all kinds of reforms, tears down high places, gets rid of Baal worshipers or idol worshipers, does a whole lot of that kind of stuff. Great, good stuff. And the Lord comes to him and says, look, this is great what you're doing. I love it. And I'm going to bless you, but it's too late for your nation. Okay, there's just the corruption, the idolatry is so widespread, has been so widespread for so long. What I purpose, I'm going to do. Okay, so despite the fact that Josiah has done all of these great things, the Lord says, this is great, you're going to be blessed, but overall, the judgment is still going to come. Okay, it's too little, too late. And very similar, it seems to me, looking at this passage, what happens here to Eliakim. Now, the interesting thing about Josiah is that once Josiah hears that all of these good things that he's been doing isn't going to result in a nation being saved, for lack of a better word, some of us, if we got news like this, would have said, well, that's it, I'm not going to have any part of this. Okay? But Josiah doubles down. He's like, no, I'm going to do this even more. Okay. Now, whether Eliakim does that or not, I don't know. But let's hear the rest of the story, so to speak, as far as what happens after Eliakim takes over. And they will hang on him the whole honor of his father's house, the offspring and issue every small vessel, from the cups to all the flagons. Okay. So basically, I think the point here he's making is that the people will turn to Eliakim and depend on him for everything and overwhelm him. because in verse 25, in that day, declares the Lord of hosts, the peg that was fastened in the secure place will give way. Okay, so one guy can't do it for the whole nation. Okay, and it will be cut down and fall, and the load that was on it will be cut off, for the Lord has spoken. Okay, so here it's like this illustration is kind of going back on a theme that has come up over and over and again in Isaiah. Okay, so Shebna should be doing this, he's not, and so Eliakim is put in the position, and he does a really great job, but he can only do so much, and the people put their trust in Eliakim. Okay, now it's great to put your trust in people, that's a good thing, but who are you really going to put your ultimate trust in? Your trust has to be in God. Okay, so Eliakim ultimately fails, and the people ultimately fail, because here, even if they had this good choice, Eliakim's a good guy, but even still, he's just a guy. Who are you going to trust? Okay, and that is a question that keeps coming over and over and over again. Now think about it. The final thought here today is the original readers of this passage are reading it, when it's put together like 100 years later. They're in exile. And they're asking themselves, wow, we had all these opportunities to trust, and we didn't. And here we even thought we were trusting a good guy, and it still didn't work. Okay, who are you going to trust? Who are you going to trust? Okay, well, that's as far as we're going to go, but actually that's through chapter 22. So what that means is we are 1/3 of the way through the book of Isaiah. So yay us. Next week, we're going to get into chapter 23. We're going to talk about Tyre and Sidon. These are a couple of Tarshish, and the judgment on the whole earth. We get to chapter 24. So thank you very much for being with me, and I hope to see you again next week. If you have any questions, by all means, let me know. Make a comment on the YouTube page, or make a comment in the Facebook, or see me when you see me. So thank you very much, and we'll see you later.